Hey everybody, welcome back to Leosophy. Real short vid this time. Kind of been busy today. Let's see, I'll just jump in because I got 3 questions. Is honey bee poop? No, it's not. I hear that a lot, and it's not. For bees, their waste is no different than any other insects. Incidentally, insects don't urinate though. They don't have a bladder. Instead, they have malpighian tubules, which function kind of like a kidney does, and it saps all the moisture, just about all the moisture, out of any other waste and recycles it back into the body. It's very efficient as far as conserving water goes, and that's actually a similar system. That's why bird manure is, or guano, whatever you want to call it, is white as the uric acid crystals. Well, birds don't urinate. Insects don't urinate. So I just think that's kind of interesting, and it's not really that relevant to your question, but I thought I'd throw that out before I answer the rest of it. Yeah, honey, if you had to compare it to a human secretion, it would be vomit. But that's not a fair point either. You see, that's we're operating under the idea that every animal has analogous organs, and there are specialty organs in a lot of different creatures, and bees are no exception. They actually have a specialist organ called a honey stomach, which, even that, I mean, is it really a stomach at that point, since it doesn't do what stomachs do? It's not full of hydrochloric acid. It doesn't get sent to the intestines. It's a special organ that there's no human analog to. And this honey stomach, it has enzymes in it that helps break down the nectar that they consume, and then furthermore, they regurgitate it. Again, that sounds like I'm talking about vomit, but it is a separate organ. They have a regular stomach too, but they put nectar in this specialty organ, this honey stomach. Enzymes help break it down, then they transfer it to other bees, and they just sort of, it's back and forth, different enzymes affecting it differently. Then it gets stored in honeycomb cells where it's dehydrated even further until it becomes honey. So there's really, I mean, I'm not opposed, I'm not going to be pedantic when somebody says that honey is bee vomit, but it's really, there's no equivalent. It's not the same thing. It would be like asking if the slime secreted by a hagfish is human mucus. It's not. It's a different thing. Even though structurally, I'm sure that the secretions contain mucin, which is the precursor, but it's not the same thing in that it doesn't come out of like the sinus cavities or anything. So similarly, honey is not feces, and I wouldn't even say that it's vomit. It's something else. Second question: do bugs and fish sleep? That's an interesting one. No and yes at the same time. They both enter states of dormancy. So I would call that sleep if you were playing fast and loose with semantics, but it's not really the same thing. It's not like, for example, when mammals and birds sleep, it's from a mental standpoint, it's equivalent to what we do. Whereas with insects and fish, it's really, the body is getting rest, but it's not like they're dreaming, and it's not like they're in the exact same mental state. For starters, they can move at a moment's notice, so that there's still some level of awareness of surroundings. So it's not exactly the same thing. And actually, I would say that most of the time, especially with ambush predators, like a lot of spiders, any given time you see them, they're sort of in a dormant state. They're not a very active creature for the most part. They're not doing a lot in their day-to-day lives. And there's other interesting things to point out about that, because those animals also sometimes hibernate, another state of dormancy. But unlike with mammals and birds, well, actually birds don't usually hibernate, but unlike with mammals, it's not like going to sleep for a long time. It's really, the entire metabolism is slowed down by the temperature, and so it's more like in between hibernation and being in a coma, in a manner of speaking. And then lastly, this is something I wanted to cover once I read that question, because this is interesting. Some small animals will enter a state that's sort of in between hibernation and sleep called torpor. And torpor is a state where all of the bodily functions slow down almost to a halt, including mental function. And it's in order to allow that animal to enter a state of dormancy without starving to death. It's especially noticeable in animals with very fast metabolisms. Well, hummingbirds and bats will often enter a state like that. So, to answer your question, fish and insects will behave as though they are sleeping, and they will enter a dormant state, but I don't think that it would be appropriate to actually say that they are asleep. I mean, if I had, for example, a fish that was lying on the bottom of an aquarium and it was in a dormant state and not injured, and somebody pointed it out and said, hey, that fish is dead, I would probably, to explain it in the easiest possible terms, I'd say, oh no, it's just sleeping. Might get a few funny looks, but, you know, they do enter states like that. Sharks, interestingly enough, because their respiration depends on water constantly moving over their gill slits. They're constantly moving even when they're in that dormant state. So, hope that answers it for you. It's a bit more complicated than or maybe actually it's probably less complicated, and I'm just making it out more complicated. Third question. Oh, this one's going to be a long one. I get a lot of Buddhist questions, it seems. How can Buddhists believe that there is no soul, but also reincarnation? Great question right off the bat. That's a great question, and it causes, I'd say, a lot of confusion in people. For starters, a lot of people might be surprised to even hear that Buddhists don't believe in the soul, because when people think of reincarnation, they think of the soul re-inhabiting other bodies, but Buddhism ascribes to the belief of anatman, which means no self, which doesn't necessarily translate exactly to no soul. However, they do not believe in the existence of a soul either. No self is a little more complicated than that, though. I mean, you could also argue, maybe you guys are familiar with the ship of Theseus. You know, if you have a boat and you replace every part of it over a long period of time, is it the same boat? Well, the same thing could be said about a person. You know, are you really the infant version of you? Every single person in the world began their existence as a single cell. And that cell, if you're walking around and able to understand what I'm saying, that cell's been dead a long time. So, are you really the original, or are you a copy of a copy of a copy? And the same thing goes with your mind. You know, we're constantly making new memories and forgetting other things. Sometimes we forget things that we would regard as unforgettable just a year or two prior. So, how we define ourselves, what we see as me, for example, or I, it's not a permanent fixture. It's not something that just is throughout the course of my life. That's at least the Buddhist view of things, and now that I'm saying it out loud, I think that's a very reasonable view. But we can go back on topic, though, back to the no soul. It's not that Buddhists don't believe in life after death so much as it's that they just reject death entirely. From that perception of the world and the universe and a person's place in it, consciousness gives rise to reality, not the other way around. See, in most views of the world, the universe exists, matter exists, the senses exist as a way of understanding reality. In their view, it's the opposite. The senses project reality into existence in order to give the consciousness something to think about. And so a soul at that point becomes irrelevant, because that means that consciousness always was and always will be. So when a person, dies, they're really just their physical body, the manifestation of consciousness, is deteriorating, and consciousness is simply finding another form to perceive reality with. So a soul becomes irrelevant at that point. So it's not that they don't believe in, they don't believe in a soul, but It's that it's not a relevant aspect of their view of the universe. A person isn't their soul by their reckoning. It's their consciousness, and consciousness outlasts the death of the physical body. So hope that makes sense. That's how they can believe in reincarnation, is because consciousness is eternal unless Nirvana or Nirvana, depending on what sect a person belongs to, Theravada or Mahayana, unless Nirvana means complete extinguishment of consciousness, then consciousness is and always will be forever. It's been around indefinitely. Like, and same question with regard to the creation of the universe. Their model, when did the universe start? It's just always been. Well, when did life start? It's just always been. Well, when did I come into being? You've just always been. Like, that's really the view of it. So that's how they get away with not believing in a soul. Hope that answers that question. Like, subscribe, ask me questions, guys. That wraps this one up. Bye.